A black maid with 8 months of silence in her hands grabbed Victoria Hayes by the back of her emerald gown and Margaret Hayes by the wrist of their silk sleeves and slammed both their faces into their own $2 million anniversary cakes, while 300 billionaires, senators, and ambassadors watched in dead silence. And the only man who could have stopped her stood 6 feet away with both hands on his head, his face white, his mouth open, watching the woman he married and the mother who raised him disappear into buttercream in front of the entire American establishment. Nobody moved. The orchestra froze mid-note. A champagne glass hit the marble and rolled in a slow, perfect circle for 10 full seconds, the loudest sound in the room. Victoria screamed through vanilla. Margaret did not scream at all. She simply stood, motionless, with the Hayes family crest dripping down her forehead. The maid did not run. She did not panic. She straightened the collar of her black uniform, looked once at Daniel, then turned to face the entire ballroom with the calm of a woman who had rehearsed this moment every night for 12 years. And she said, in a voice so steady it cut the room in half, "Today, everyone in this room is going to learn the truth these 2 women buried 12 years ago. Please stay. All of you. You are going to want to hear this." She looked directly at Daniel. "Especially you." Cut to black. The narrator asks, how could an ordinary maid publicly humiliate one of America's richest families? And why wasn't she afraid of losing everything? The real story begins. The rest of the story does not begin with the cake. It begins 12 years earlier, in a brownstone in Cleveland, on the night a brilliant man named James Johnson stopped answering his daughter's phone calls. Sarah had been 17. Her father had been the kind of father other children envied. Tall, warm, funny. He made terrible pancakes and read aloud from law books at breakfast because he believed sincerely that a good argument was the highest form of love. He had graduated top of his class at Howard, clerked for a federal judge in Detroit, and at 38 had been named the youngest partner at one of the most respected corporate firms in the Midwest. He took cases other lawyers refused. Whistleblowers, whistleblower spouses, employees who had been defrauded by the companies that signed their paychecks. He did not advertise. He did not need to. The cases came to him because the stories came to him, and the stories always ended the same way. He won. Sarah's mother had died when Sarah was 4. Cancer. Fast, quiet. After that, it was just the 2 of them, and the brownstone, and the long Sunday mornings where he would sit at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and walk her through whatever case he was working on as though she were a junior colleague. She learned early that facts were patient, that evidence was patient, and that the truth almost always survived long enough to be heard, if someone was willing to wait for it. In the autumn of her senior year of high school, her father took a new case. A woman named Diane Kessler had come to him in tears. She had worked for 16 years as the personal assistant to the late founder of a Midwestern holding company. After his death, his family had frozen her pension, sued her for misappropriation of funds, and quietly buried a letter she claimed proved a much older crime. James agreed to take the case pro bono. He told Sarah at breakfast one Saturday, with pancakes burned on one side and perfect on the other, that he had a feeling this one was going to change his life. The holding company was Hayes Industries. The family was the Hayes family. The patriarch had died 2 years earlier, but his widow, Margaret Hayes, still controlled the board. His son Daniel was being groomed for leadership. His daughter-in-law-to-be, Victoria Langford at the time, was being groomed for the cameras. Diane Kessler's letter, hidden in a hollowed-out law book in her attic for almost a decade, allegedly proved that Margaret had been involved 25 years earlier in a quiet transaction that had quietly destroyed a smaller competitor in the same industry. Fraud. Forgery. A forged signature on a single page that had cost hundreds of people their jobs, and one competitor his entire company. The competitor had been a man named Arthur Langford. He was Victoria's father. 6 weeks after James took the case, his car was run off the road on a wet stretch of interstate outside Chicago. The police report described black ice. The medical examiner described a man who had died instantly of a broken neck. The insurance company paid out within the month. The investigation was closed. There were no witnesses. There were no cameras. There was no trial. There was just a brownstone in Cleveland where a 17-year-old girl sat on the stairs and waited for a key in the door that would never turn again. Sarah did not cry that night. She sat at the kitchen table, in front of the same yellow legal pad her father had used, and she made a list. Not a list of grief, a list of questions. The first question was simple. The first question would take her 12 years to answer. Why had her father been on that stretch of road at that exact hour? He had told her he would be in Cleveland. He had told her he would be home for dinner. He had not been in Cleveland. He had been in Chicago. Someone had changed his schedule without telling her. Someone had known exactly where he would be. She wrote the question down. She underlined it twice. She put the legal pad in a box. She closed the box. She carried the box to the attic. She went to school the next morning. Over the next 4 years, she graduated at the top of her class. She won a full scholarship to Yale Law. She spent her summers clerking for federal judges and human rights NGOs. She never once mentioned her father. She never once mentioned the case. To everyone around her, she was simply the brilliant, quiet girl with the strange discipline of someone who had already lost everything that mattered and was now in no particular hurry. Her professors called her promising. Her classmates called her unreadable. The few friends she allowed herself called her Sarah. In her second year of law school, Sarah began to quietly investigate. She did not file FOIA requests. She did not hire private investigators. She did not announce anything. She simply started reading. She read every public filing Hayes Industries had ever made. She read every lawsuit that mentioned the Hayes name. She read the obituary of Arthur Langford, Victoria's father, and noticed in the third paragraph a small sentence she did not like. Arthur Langford had been a competitor of Hayes Industries until his company collapsed in a single quarter. No cause of collapse was given. No bankruptcy was mentioned. The obituary described him simply as a retired businessman who had loved sailing. She read the sentence again. Retired businessman who had loved sailing. She read the sentence a third time. Then she pulled Diane Kessler's name from a public court docket and wrote her a letter. Diane did not answer for 3 months. When she did, she answered from a hospital bed in Indianapolis, and the letter was a single page, handwritten, and very tired. She told Sarah everything. She told her about the letter she had hidden for a decade. She told her about the forged signature. She told her about the night she had tried to take the letter to the FBI, and a man she did not recognize had followed her home from the Federal Building in Indianapolis and sat for 45 minutes in a black car outside her apartment. She told her she had been too afraid to go to the police. She told her she had been too afraid to throw the letter away. She told her, in the last paragraph, that a man named James Johnson had called her 3 weeks before he died and told her he had found something else. He had not told her what. He had told her he was coming to Chicago to show her. He had not arrived. Sarah sat in her small apartment in New Haven for a long time after that letter. Then she took out the yellow legal pad from the box in the attic. She added a second question. She underlined it twice. She made a list of every person she needed to meet, and then she began to plan. The plan took her 4 more years to finish. She graduated from Yale. She clerked for 2 years. She turned down offers at 3 of the largest firms in the country. She took a job instead with a small nonprofit that placed advocates inside domestic violence shelters, because shelters taught her 2 things she would need later. The first was patience. The second was how to be invisible while paying very close attention. She learned to listen the way her father had listened. She learned to look at a room the way her father had looked at a room. She learned that the truth almost always surfaces in the small spaces between sentences. When she was 27, she moved to New York. She rented a small studio in Queens. She applied for a position as a domestic worker at one of the city's largest private staffing agencies. She provided 3 references that all led back to a small web of people she trusted completely. She interviewed in a clean white blouse and a black skirt. She spoke softly. She answered every question correctly. The agency placed her 3 weeks later in the Hayes Mansion. She accepted the position on a Tuesday. She unpacked her suitcase on a Wednesday. She reported for her first shift on a Thursday. She wore the uniform like a costume. She smiled like a woman who had been taught to smile by people who did not pay her enough to frown. She memorized the layout of the mansion in her first week. She memorized the rotation of the guards in her second. She memorized the names of every executive assistant, every driver, every housekeeper, every cook, every junior associate who came up from the city on weekends. She befriended the older women in the kitchen. She learned that old housekeepers, treated with respect, will tell you everything they have seen in 40 years of service, if you ask the right way. She did not ask about the family. She did not ask about Margaret. She did not ask about Victoria. She waited. The truth came to her anyway. It came in fragments. A sentence overheard through a cracked pantry door. A photograph glimpsed on a hallway table and quietly photographed in return. A confidential memorandum left in a recycling bin that should have been shredded. A file in a locked drawer that had been locked with a key that the housekeeper had used for 23 years, and that Sarah had politely offered to sharpen on a Wednesday afternoon. In 8 months, Sarah assembled a picture. The forged signature was real. The document that had destroyed Arthur Langford had been typed on Hayes Industries' letterhead, signed in a hand that was not Margaret's, but that no handwriting analyst had ever been allowed to examine. Diane Kessler's original letter, hidden for decades, was real. James Johnson's visit to Chicago on the night he died had been arranged by a man named Roger Yates, who had once worked for Hayes Industries, and who had died 6 months after James, of what the police described as a self-inflicted gunshot. 2 deaths, 2 closed cases, 2 sets of police files that no one had ever opened at the same time. She discovered something else in the 8th month. She discovered that her father's phone records, subpoenaed quietly by a sympathetic clerk in Chicago, showed a single incoming call at 9:47 p.m. on the night he died. The call had come from a number registered to a Hayes Industries executive in New York. The call had lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Her father had been on the road, in the wrong city, at the wrong hour, because someone had asked him to be. She did not confront anyone. She did not file anything. She did not go to the press. She waited for the 45th anniversary of Hayes Industries because she had read, in an old society column, that the entire board of directors, the senior partners, the foreign ambassadors, the senators, the Hollywood clients, and the charity committees would be in the same ballroom on the same night. She wanted witnesses. She wanted cameras. She wanted the room to see what the room had never been allowed to see. She bought the airline ticket to Vienna. She intercepted the bakery order at the loading dock on the morning of the party. She did not change the cake. She did not poison anything. She simply replaced the bottom tier of the second cake with a layer of vanilla sponge that had been hollowed out from underneath and refilled with a single sealed envelope. The envelope was wrapped in cling film. The envelope contained a flash drive. The flash drive contained 8 months of photographs, 3 handwritten confessions, 2 audio recordings, 1 video file, and a single 1-page letter addressed to the board of directors of Hayes Industries, written by a lawyer named James Johnson 12 years ago and never delivered. She had timed the orchestra. She had memorized the waltz. She had counted the seconds between the third bar and the fifth so that the room would be looking at the cakes and not at her when she moved. The cakes, after all, were only ever the delivery mechanism. The humiliation was the distraction. The truth was underneath. She had expected guards. She had expected Victoria's scream. She had expected Margaret's silence. She had not expected Daniel. She had studied Daniel for 8 months. She had watched him at breakfast. She had watched him thank the kitchen staff. She had watched him hold the elevator for a junior associate whose name he should not have known. She had watched him carry an elderly housekeeper's groceries to a cab on a Sunday afternoon when he thought no one was looking. She had, against every rule she had set for herself, begun to like him. She had told herself repeatedly that liking him was not the same as trusting him. She had told herself that Daniel was not Margaret. She had told herself that Daniel was not Victoria. She had told herself that Daniel was the kind of man who, once he knew, would want to know. She had not expected his face when she turned to look at him, to look the way it looked. The cake was dripping from his wife's gown. The orchestra was silent. The guests were staring. Daniel was staring at Sarah with the expression of a man who had just realized that the house he had lived in his entire life had been built on top of a grave. "Daniel," Sarah said, very quietly, "don't say anything yet, please. Don't say anything until you've watched everything on this drive. There's a screen behind the curtain on the east wall of the ballroom. Your AV team set it up for the anniversary video. Use it. Show it to the room. I want every single person in this room to see what these 2 women did to my father, and to Diane Kessler, and to Arthur Langford, and to every person they buried to keep this family beautiful." She held up the flash drive. Her hand did not shake. "The truth is on this drive," she said. "The truth has been on this drive for 12 years. I am the only person who survived long enough to deliver it." In the ballroom, the silence had become a kind of weather. Victoria, still on her knees in buttercream, was screaming for security. Margaret, still standing, had not moved. Her eyes, the only part of her face still visible beneath the sugar, were perfectly, terrifyingly calm. "Get her out," Victoria said. "Get her out of this house. Get her out of my sight." "Daniel," Margaret said, very softly. "Daniel, listen to your mother. Don't listen to a word this woman says. She is a maid. She is nothing. She is a disgruntled employee who has been stealing from this family for months, and she is now trying to blame us for a car accident that happened 1,000 miles from here. Have security remove her. Have her arrested. Have her humiliated. Do it now, before the press sees her, before the donors see her, before the board sees her. Do it now, son. Daniel did not move. His eyes were still on Sarah. He looked, for a long moment, like a man standing in the path of a train that had already passed through him. He crossed the ballroom. He did not cross to Sarah. He crossed to the east curtain. He pulled the curtain open. The projection screen was already there, white and blank. He turned to his AV technician, who was frozen at the back of the room, and he said, very quietly, "Put this on the screen." "Daniel," Margaret said, more sharply now, "do not do this. Do not let her turn this family's anniversary into a circus. Do not let a maid—" "She is not a maid, Mother." His voice broke on the word mother. "She is the daughter of the man whose law partner died on the same night my father's competitor lost his company. I never asked about that night. I never asked about the car. I never asked about the letter. I am asking now. Put this on the screen, please." The technician plugged in the flash drive. The ballroom lights dimmed. The first image on the screen was a photograph of James Johnson. Tall, warm, laughing at a table with his arm around a teenage daughter. Sarah, in the front row of the room, closed her eyes for the first time in 8 months. The second image was the forged signature. Side by side with Margaret Hayes's handwriting from a 1994 letter to the Hayes Industries board. The forgeries matched. The third image was Diane Kessler's original letter, photographed in full. The fourth image was Roger Yates's phone records. The fifth image was the call from Hayes Industries to James Johnson at 9:47 p.m. The sixth image was the police sketch of the black car outside Diane Kessler's apartment in Indianapolis. The seventh image was a 2002 newspaper clipping about Arthur Langford's retirement. The word retirement in quotation marks, because the journalist had not believed it then either. The eighth image was the audio recording. Sarah had obtained it 3 months earlier from the household's former driver, a man in his 70s who had spent his life savings on a hearing aid and his last shred of conscience on a cassette recorder. The recording was of Margaret Hayes in 2001 telling Roger Yates in plain language that James Johnson had to be stopped before he reached Chicago. The ballroom listened. Victoria was on her feet now, screaming that the recording was fake, that the photographs were doctored, that Sarah was a con artist, that the Hayes family would bury her the way they had buried everyone else who tried to bring them down. Margaret did not scream. Margaret simply watched the screen with the same expression she had worn for 60 years. The expression of a woman who had decided long ago that other people were a kind of weather. And then Daniel turned to his mother. "Mother," he said, "did you know about any of this?" It was not a question. It was a sentence with a question mark at the end. Margaret looked at her son. She lifted her chin. She did not blink. "You were a child, Daniel," she said. "You are still a child. You do not understand how families are built. You do not understand what has to be buried so that something beautiful can stand on top of it. Your father understood. Your grandfather understood. This woman," she pointed one sugar-crusted finger at Sarah. "This woman is a criminal. She stole from this house. She lied to this family. She has done everything in her power to destroy us on the one night we are supposed to be celebrating. I will not apologize for protecting you. I will not apologize for protecting this name. I will not apologize for anything." Daniel stared at his mother for a long time. Then he looked at his wife, who was still on her knees in buttercream, still screaming, still reaching for a phone that was no longer in her hand. Then he looked back at his mother. "You killed a man," he said. "I protected a family," she said. "You killed a man," he said again. The ballroom was perfectly silent. The orchestra had quietly packed their instruments. The senator at the back of the room had quietly slipped out a side door. The PR girl had quietly woken up. 300 guests, who had come to celebrate 45 years of a beautiful name, stood in a room that was no longer beautiful. Sarah spoke from the front row. Her voice was very steady. "Margaret," she said, "I am not asking you to apologize. I am not asking you to confess. I am asking you, in front of every person whose name is on that board, to listen to what I have to say. My name is Sarah Johnson. I am 29 years old. I am a graduate of Yale Law School. I am a former law clerk for the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. I have spent the last 8 months working inside your home as a domestic employee because it was the only way I could be close enough to hear what you say when you think no one is listening." She took one step forward. "I have not stolen from this family. I have not lied to this family. I have done exactly what my father would have done. I have waited. I have listened. I have collected evidence. I have followed the law. And I have, tonight, given every person in this room the chance to see what you have done." She looked at Daniel. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I am sorry for your wife. I am sorry for your mother. I am sorry for the name you have carried your entire life. But the truth is older than your name. The truth is older than this mansion. The truth does not belong to the people who can afford to bury it. The truth belongs to the people who can no longer afford to stay silent." She turned to the room. "The authorities have already been contacted," she said. "The district attorney for New York County received a copy of the flash drive an hour before the party began. The FBI field office in Indianapolis received a second copy. Diane Kessler, who is alive, in poor health, and very brave, will be available to testify. I have asked for one thing in return for my cooperation. I have asked that Margaret Hayes and Victoria Hayes be charged with conspiracy to commit murder in connection with the deaths of James Johnson and Roger Yates. I have asked that the statute of limitations be reviewed and that the case be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." The ballroom did not breathe. Victoria, who had been screaming for 30 minutes, finally went quiet. She looked, for the first time all evening, like a woman who understood that the room was no longer on her side. Margaret looked at Sarah. The two women stood 10 feet apart, one in a black uniform, one in a gown covered in buttercream. And the distance between them was the distance between two entirely different kinds of power. Margaret spoke first. "You think you have won," she said. "No," Sarah said. "I think my father has been heard." The ballroom lights came up. The doors at the back of the room opened. 2 men in dark suits and 2 officers in uniform stepped into the light. The district attorney's office had been waiting outside the gates of the estate for the duration of the party. They crossed the marble floor. They crossed to Margaret. They crossed to Victoria. Margaret looked at her son one last time. Her face was still. Her makeup was still perfect. The buttercream was still dripping from her chin. She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not ask for help. She simply looked at the man she had raised and said, in a voice so quiet the room had to hold its breath to hear it, "Take care of the house, Daniel. It is older than any of us." Victoria, by contrast, screamed. She screamed for her lawyers. She screamed for her publicist. She screamed for her father, who had been dead for almost 20 years. She screamed for her children. She screamed for the cameras. She screamed for the world she had built on top of the world her mother had buried. 2 officers lifted her gently by the arms. She kicked. She cried. She swore. She begged. She did not, at any point, say she was sorry. Daniel watched his wife and his mother cross the ballroom. He did not move to help them. He did not move to stop them. He did not move at all. He stood in the middle of his own party, in the middle of his own life, with buttercream on his shoes and the truth on a screen behind him. And he understood, for the first time in his 48 years, that the house he had lived in had never been his. The officers reached the doors. Margaret walked through them without looking back. Victoria looked back 17 times. The ballroom emptied slowly. Servers cleared glasses. Guests disappeared into black cars. The orchestra quietly packed their instruments into velvet cases and slipped out the service entrance. Within an hour, only Daniel and Sarah were left. Sarah stood at the front of the room, in front of the projection screen, in front of the photograph of her father. She had not sat down all evening. She had not drunk a glass of water. She had not eaten a single piece of cake. Daniel crossed the room slowly. He stopped a few feet from her. He did not speak for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was very tired. "You took my family from me tonight," he said. "Yes," Sarah said. "You destroyed my mother." "Your mother destroyed your mother," Sarah said. "I only made it visible." He nodded slowly. He looked at the screen. He looked at her father. "He would have liked you," Daniel said. "He would have been proud of you." "Yes," Sarah said. "He would have." Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, very softly, "What do I do now?" Sarah looked at him. She looked at him the way her father had taught her to look at people, which was the way you look at a person when you are about to tell them something true. "You rebuild," she said. "Not the house, not the name. You rebuild the part of yourself that believed you could inherit a clean life from a dirty foundation. You take the name off the building. You take the family off the foundation. You sit in an empty room. You sit there for as long as it takes. And then, when you are ready, you start again. Not as a haze, as a man named Daniel, who has decided that the truth is older than his family, and that the truth is more important." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. He did not say thank you. He did not say he was sorry. He did not say he understood. He simply nodded, once, and walked out of his own ballroom. Sarah stood alone in the room. The candles on the cakes had gone out. The projection screen still glowed faintly. She crossed to the screen. She stood in front of her father's photograph for a long time. She did not speak. She did not cry. She simply stood there, in her black uniform, in her white apron, in the soft shoes that had made no sound on the marble all evening, and she let herself, for the first time in 12 years, feel the full weight of having finally been heard. Then she walked to the second cake, the one Victoria and Margaret had not yet touched. She lifted the empty bottom tier. She opened the hollowed-out sponge where the flash drive had been hidden for the last 8 months. She removed a second envelope. This one was not for the board. This one was not for Daniel. This one was addressed, in her father's handwriting, to a woman named Margaret Hayes, and it contained a single sentence. 12 years ago, you buried my voice. Tonight, I am your voice. She left the envelope on the table. She folded her apron. She walked out of the ballroom, through the kitchen where the older housekeepers had begun to cry without understanding why, and out into the night where a single black car was waiting to take her home to Queens. The camera held on the envelope for a long time. Then it slowly pulled up, out of the ballroom, past the chandeliers, past the gardens, past the iron gates, and out into the night. The narrator's voice came back very softly. How could an ordinary maid publicly humiliate one of America's richest families? And why wasn't she afraid of losing everything? Because she wasn't a maid. She was a daughter. She wasn't afraid of losing everything because she had already lost everything 12 years ago on a wet stretch of road outside Chicago. And the only thing she had left to lose was the truth. The screen went black. A single line appeared in small white letters against the black. For James Johnson, who taught his daughter that the truth is patient. But there is one more envelope no one has opened yet. The next chapter begins at dawn. If this story hit you the way it hit me, do 3 things for me before you leave. Tap that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss the next chapter, because what happens to Daniel in that empty room at dawn is the part nobody is ready for. Smash that like button if you believe the truth is older than any name. And drop 1 word in the comments. Just 1 word. The word is enough. Tell me, in your own words, was Sarah a criminal? Or was Sarah the only brave person in that room? I will read every single comment. And if this video hits 100,000 likes, I will release part 2 at dawn, where Daniel opens the second envelope alone. And what he reads inside changes everything.